In this video, I'll show you some of the features Inkscape uses to create more controlled compositions and help you when drawing SVG graphics. The first option I want to introduce is grids, and to show your grid, go to View and select Page Grid. Depending on your resolution, these cells may or may not fit nicely within the confines of your page document. Zooming in will allow you to work with more or less intersection points. Start by selecting the Bezier Curves tool, and by watching for the X indicator, you can reliably place content a certain number of units away from other content. If you are creating a special path that you want to replicate, when you click and drag, you can keep track of how many units away from the last position and which direction you're dragging it in order to replicate this later on. Using circles, it gives you an indication of the bounding box that will be created. Where before, if you wanted to create a perfect circle, you could Shift Control drag, or in this case, you can use the cells to determine where your perfect circle will end and drag your circle that way. You can repeat this for a rectangle. And if you're being extremely picky, use the measurement tool, watching for the intersection point, and you can check to see how many pixels each one of your objects is. Another option is guides. To create a guide, you would drag from the ruler, click and drag from the ruler into your document or outside of the page bounds. I have a few already created. And you can see that it's highlighted in red and drag it to different locations, or even manually adjusting its properties by double-clicking it. And in this case, I want to adjust the angle, but you can adjust the X and Y coordinates as well as its visual appearance. To remove a guide, select it and press Delete. The snapping mode Inkscape uses is defined by which icons are highlighted on the right section you see here. If you do not want to snap to grids, say it's interfering when you're drawing, you want to use the freehand tool, you can disable this as well as applying this to the guides, the page bounds, and if you have content which is already created and you want it to snap to other content as well as the grids or guides, you can enable the two smooth nodes and cusp nodes options. If you did not do this, and you were to create content, you would not be restricted to particular points. Disabling the grid option, you see here you can now use it in a freehand manner. With the grid as well as the cusp node detection mode selected, it will snap to the content intersection points of your visual aids. This applies to content which is copied and pasted. You can create your composition however you need to, depending on the guides you you have set up and the grid which is available. Here I have defined the body of my fish and placed my Bezier curves within that area using the grids for finer details. At this point, I want to create a stream of bubbles which passes up along this column. I have the circles I'll be working with already. They will have to be placed in a different location for the optimal result. And creating a union from these two. Selecting both and creating a union from my one circle to what I want to transform it being the two circles. One thing to keep in mind here, if your content is the same color as another portion and you can't see what you need to select, go to View, Display Mode, Outline, and then you will see all your objects. Bringing it back to normal, go to Path, Path Effects, and add an interpolated subpath. It'll try to transform this single circle into the two combined circles. Adding more will show more of a transition, more steps between this calculation. You can adjust what is displayed dynamically by using the node selector and manipulating the start or finishing result. Adjusting the trajectory, it will snap to particular intersection points given the items I have enabled on the side here. You can even add additional nodes and snap content to intersection points. Remember to select the trajectory when working with the path that it's interpolated against. I have applied a similar technique to the bottom section here with the seaweed. To get a different but controlled background color where you apply a gradient and have multiple color stops, what you would do in this case is know which area you will apply this to and have a few perhaps guides as well as grids to work with. In this case, I will be applying this to the head, move it to the end and up one step. At this point, using the horizontal guide to drag my gradient tool across, I will go a little bit farther to the last fin, and where I see, I will disable grids at this point, where I see a guide intersecting this particular gradient pattern, I will click it, double click it, where I see an X appear. I can apply a variation in the gradient that is applied. This will be a monochromatic color scheme, meaning it's within the same hue. And maybe finishing off with a darker color. Enable grid snapping once again. I can snap it and see the darker shade being pulled more into this section. I'll repeat these steps to create a final image, but this should be enough to get you started to have more control over your compositions, maybe some custom gradients, a rainbow, a sunset, and even if you want to create more interpolation, you can play around with these techniques.